Simon's from AppTweak. Are you there, Simon? Hopefully he'll be joining us. There he comes. Hey, Simon, how you doing? So fingers crossed I don't disappear from you again. So Simon, over to you. Tell us all about what we can gain from monitoring our mobile competitors.
Sure, thanks, Oscar. So hey everyone, super happy to join here today. Before I jump into today's topic, I have a quick word about my company, AppTweak. We are an ASO and market intelligence tool. So we work with app developers and marketers to help them improve their visibility and increase their organic downloads. In terms of gaming clients, we work with quite a few big names already. I can quote Jam City, Zynga, Warner Bros, quite a few more as well. But so we actually work with gaming clients and apps in different verticals, also in different markets. And personally, as head of ASO, my job is to work with some of our clients to bring them expertise with a small consulting team to help them really get those boosts and find out what are the most valuable insights they can see in the store. And I've been doing ASO for almost 4 years now. And what I find most interesting is connecting these dots with other sides of growth, which is going to be mentioned in today's topic. So in terms of what I'm going to tell you about, first I'll discuss how to evaluate the competitive landscape for your game. Then what are the valuable insights you can get from your competition data? And I'll try to also bring the debate at the end about some of the pitfalls you need to avoid when doing the competition monitoring, because there are some risks in doing this, and it's always important to be aware of those. Before I forget, we have some of our team members in the chat, and I'll also be taking questions at the end. So feel free to ask questions anytime, and I'll be super happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. Now, the first thing to do when starting a competition monitoring is ask yourself, who are your competitors? And so obviously you already know some of them, and you should start with those. You should start with the top of mind competitors. These competitors have very similar products, and put them very high on your list. But what you also need to consider is that you might be competing with more distant rivals that are going to be in the way of some of the goals you may have, even though they don't have the same kind of products. And so here, an example I like to give is looking at the game categories, card games categories, especially. Looking at Hearthstone, World Series of Poker, and Uno, three games that I don't think many would consider to be direct competitors for each other. I wouldn't. But still, you have to think they might be competing in some ways, because all three are in the card games category, which means that if one of their goals is to be ranking at the top of the category, they have to be aware of threats coming from non-direct competitors. If we're also looking at Google tags specifically for the Play Store, looking at who else is using the same Play Store tags, we can also be discussing keywords. Obviously, card games might also be a keyword, online card game, and so on. And so these generic keywords might be targeted by competitors you didn't think about. And finally, a third way to find out who could be additional competitors is to look at your store product page, and specifically at the similar app section, to see which games are associated to your app. You can also look at app collections. If your game has been featured in one of these collections, you want to know who else was in the collection, because these are games that are going to be fighting for the same kind of customer attention. Now, once you have a large list of competitors, the second step is going to be classifying them. You want to consider which are the most important competitors, and for each type of competitor, what kind of information you can learn from monitoring them. So I took the example of Hearthstone again to show you how we do it at AppTweak. We use a comprehensive index we've built, which is called the App Power, and which is based on category rankings and the weight we give to each category depending on the total amount of downloads this category is bringing to the App Store every day. So when we look at Hearthstone, their main rivals, I think, should be Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a higher app power, but is not out of reach. It is a competitor that is probably quite active, that probably has some of the main kind of gamers as target, and this is going to be the most important one. But at the same time, you also have threats, Legends of Runeterra and Gwent, games that have very similar gameplay to Hearthstone, but smaller app power, so they're technically not above Hearthstone, but you still want to keep a very close eye on them to know what they're doing. A third type of competitors is going to be the market leaders. So here I took the example of Raid Shadow Legends and Mortal Kombat. Both of these are more distant competitors already, but since they might be targeting some of the same audience, and because they have such higher app power, it's nice to have these in mind as market leaders you can learn from by monitoring how they got there. The fourth category would be distant rivals, and that's the example of the Elder Scrolls Legends, a game that also has very similar gameplay to Hearthstone, but whose app power is very much lower and therefore does not necessarily need to be monitored at the same frequency just because they're not in a position to threaten Hearthstone right now. Last thing to remember about how to create your competitor list and classify your competitors is that you should refresh the list every once in a while. So some of the situations where you should refresh your list, I believe, are after a competitor launch, obviously adding this competitor and also checking if other competitors you might not have thought of have also entered the market. But also after a store algorithm update, finding out how your visibility has changed and who has benefited from the algorithm update. If you're expanding to new countries, refresh your competitor list by looking at who is actually competing in this country. For instance, if we look at strategy games, the comparison of top 10 games between the US and France shows that only 4 of the top 10 games are present in both countries in terms of being present in the top 10, I mean. Another situation would be there's a major seasonal event. And if all of these situations have not led you to refresh your list, then I would still say you should give at least 1 or 2 updates a year because the store is always changing and it's important to at least check what's going on. Now, in terms of data you can get from your competitors, there are quite a few. I'm going to start with lessons you can learn from monitoring category and rankings and download estimates. And that's actually a use case we've had with one of our clients earlier this year, who came to us a month before a new competitor was going to launch. They already knew this competitor was going to be successful and very active, especially in terms of UA. And they came to us with a challenge of saying they wanted to outperform their competitors. They were ready to spend UA budgets, but they still wanted to adjust costs to not spend too much money just to be outperforming their competitor. And so what we did was we worked with them to compile a comprehensive report that we created for them and that we sent them every day. So they would be able to adjust their UA spending. They focus on the App Store and always get more downloads than their competitor in the App Store. What was interesting that in terms of results, we saw them move from the bottom of the top 10 in the secondary category to the top one spot, to the first spot. And this meant that they were both ahead of their competitor, which was second on most days, but also of other competitors, more distant ones that they did not challenge usually. In the first category, this was a much more competitive category where they used to rank between the 100th and 200th position, and they surged to the top 15. And at the end of our study, they were ranking number 11. The second lesson we got by doing that was confirming that there can be an organic boost when doing UA. Because as you can see here, knowing that there's been no metadata update at the same time, we saw that by simply increasing the UA spend, there was a 10% increase in visibility in the months that followed the competitor launch, and that the installs, especially that came on top of what they used to have, were mostly coming from generic keywords. A second lesson that you can be aiming for is when you monitor competitors in terms of pure metadata and creative activity. And so here, what you want to be able to do is react to changes your competitors are making, and possibly also understand their focus and their strategy on the store better. So for this one, I actually took the example of racing games, and I will draw your attention to Need for Speed No Limits to begin with. So looking at the changes to the store page, to the App Store page, Need for Speed has been doing over the past year. What I've seen is that they've changed their icon 10 times, they've changed their screenshot 7 times, and they haven't changed anything else. And that tells me first that their focus is really on creative optimization. And that means to me that because they're really trying to improve creatives and therefore improve the conversion of their app, I would assume most of their traffic is probably coming from either UA or their brand traffic. And that's going to be interesting because if we compare this to CSR2, for instance, you can see that CSR2 has updated their subtitle twice. They've made changes to both text and creatives. And that to me means they have a more global approach to ASO, but especially that they're doing keyword optimization when Need for Speed is not. And so when we compare to Hashiraya Drifter, which was the game I started with, what you can see is that Hashiraya Drifter has been more active than most of its competitors in pretty much every field. The one I took the most interest in was the promo text, because the promo text does not serve keyword optimization. The impact on conversion can change quite much depending on what you are promoting. And in my experience, games tend to use promo text especially to promote live ops that they have. And so that tells me there might be more to learn from Hashiraya Drifter if you want to know what kind of live ops can be run in a racing game. The third section I would look at to learn more lessons from your competitors is going to be the reviews and ratings. This is often overlooked, and I think it's a mistake because I call it kind of pompously the voice of customer intent. And what I mean by that is that reviews and ratings from your game, but also from competitors, are going to tell you what customers are expecting. And that means that if you look at positive reviews from your competitors, you can learn what are some strong features that customers like in a game and that you might want to also have, but also, or maybe you want to stay away from these because other games are too successful in this already. On the other hand, if you look at negative reviews from your competitors, you can learn what are their weaknesses, what are customers expecting from them, and build it yourself to show a very competitive product. And if you're looking at Google Play specifically, I like to give this small tip about looking at your Android device, your Android phone, because going to a product page there can actually show you also some of the texts and topics that Google is able to associate with a game simply by looking at the reviews and ratings. So this is already also a goldmine in terms of learn what people are talking about. The last type of insight I want to mention is looking at your competitor's approach to user acquisition. And by that, I mean paid UA. What you can do using market intelligence tools like AppTweak is look at who is being the most active in terms of UA, but also discover which creative format they're using, and even looking at the different creatives, what are going to be the different value propositions, what are going to be the different elements they like to promote to convert potential customers to active players. And so here, the example came from Strategy Game, where I saw that Lords Mobile is very active when it comes to the number of creatives they're running, whereas Clash of Clans or Plants vs. Zombies are not running UA on Facebook-related channels. So focusing on Lords Mobile, I could also see that they're doing creatives that are mostly based on either dynamic creatives or video. There's very few images. It's not necessarily very surprising, but when you compare different types of games, you can see that every game has a different approach. So if you want to mimic Lords Mobile, you know where to look in terms of what kind of creatives you should be also running. And if you look at the creatives themselves, you can see what is the CTA, you can see what is the gameplay they're showing to understand what is working for them, hopefully, and what are actions you can take to either replicate or take a different step to convert users in that field. Now, before I open to questions, there's two main pitfalls I want to talk about when it comes to competition monitoring. The first one is misinterpreting the data and forcing best practices onto your own product. So for that one, I came back to racing games to show that if you look at 3 of the top racing games, you see that they all use a video. They all use creatives in landscape format. And the risk when you see this is thinking this is the only way. And that's why I also like to show Mario Kart Tour as a possible alternative, because Mario Kart Tour is using portrait format. And that's because this is how the game is played. And so the lesson here is don't misinterpret the data from seeing other games use landscape, which means I have to use landscape, but instead go a step further and think about what is adequate for your game and what should be different, even in terms of USPs, even in terms of creatives. Think about what you see here that is probably working, but also if this is just going to make you blend in, or if there's a way to take those best practices, but still apply them to your game in a way that will help you stand out. The second pitfall I wanted to bring up is not looking at the whole picture, and it's somehow related to the previous one. Here, when I say don't forget to look at the whole picture, it means that you need to make sure you understand all the implications of a choice made by a competitor before you choose to apply it to your own game. So I took a very popular example right now, which is looking at what PlayerX is doing when it comes to creatives. looking at fake ads, as they're called, because they don't reflect the gameplay. And so what you can see is that they're actually not just running ads, dynamic ads that are playing mini games, but also they're actually promoting the same kind of gameplay on their store page. They're increasing the amount of mini games in their apps. And at the same time, we do see that users in the store are complaining about this, are saying that the game is not conform to their expectations. So with all of that in mind, it's very important that you get to understand that if you want to take the same approach to creatives, you have to know these are some of the risks that you will have to deal with. And then it's up to you to decide whether it's worth it or not. But don't forget to look at the whole picture. Before I open to Q&A, I just wanted to also mention you can get my slides on our website, on our social media. And I'm very happy to take your questions now.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. I mean, so many areas to cover. I want to just decide where to sort of stick into this. So, let's start with one of the questions that was asked. So this is Joe Plug, who is saying, can developers choose what their competitors are using keywords? I mean, how does that function? How do you basically identify through keywords what people you should be treating as competitors?
So usually it starts with keyword research. You know what your game is going to be about. So start by looking at these as keywords that are going to be related to your game to find out who else is doing this, and find which keywords are very competitive and which are not. And combining this information with the traffic associated with each keyword, you can find your sweet spot and your way of addressing competitors to kind of grab those market shares.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And I think getting this sort of balance right is always tricky. I often look at games when I'm doing competitor analysis. I try to sort of not just go literal, but try to identify audiences. And to me, it's as important to identify what audiences would do instead of your game. And this is like probably because I'm an old school product owner. So when we were first designing game platforms, we were thinking about what TV shows were you watching, what social media what are you watching, and I think that wider perspective is actually quite hard to sort of break down. I know that's not the point of what you're trying to say, but I think it does have an impact on the games you choose.
It does have an impact, and you can actually tie that loop between finding keywords and your sweet spot, but also understanding who's already occupying that space on keywords. And that's something where I used to say, think about keywords as also reflecting your customer intent. So when you're thinking about a keyword, look at what's a long tail available here, because you can have stuff such as long tail about online games, PvP, or offline. These are very different. You also want to check in terms of live search, who is already ranking there and how is they talking about it? Because if we're looking at the top games that are ranking for something like online card games, and no one is saying online, then either it means everyone is missing out, or the algorithm doesn't need you to be saying you're online to say, okay, this is what is popular among online games. So it's also going to inform your own strategy after that, to know who's there and what are they already doing.
It's interesting because I think there's a level of sophistication which comes basically when you're at the launch stage versus when you're in a living kind of operational stage of a game. Mostly because I think you don't really know who your audience is until you're actually running as a sort of functionally ongoing experience. So how would somebody who's relatively sort of small get started with a lot of this stuff? It seems like a lot of this data is quite expensive to access. Are there areas you think which is the lowest hanging fruit? I mean, there's a couple of questions here in terms of How do you look if you're running a hyper casual game? Is it different? What source you would use as a starting point? If you're running a mid-core or a hardcore game, what would those sources be? I'm just interested in what you think are the kind of priority sources of data if somebody is coming at this relatively fresh.
It is an interesting question. It's not an easy one, but
No.
I'd say you can do all of this manually. Tools like AppTweak are very powerful because we compile the data for you.
Yeah.
We give it in a UX friendly manner, but the data we pull is coming from the store, and so we're going to help you save time in aggregating the data, finding the right data. Now, the data itself is available on the store, and what you should look at is going to be for instance, if you want to know how much keyword optimization is, it's if you have a first list of competitors, start with that list. Have a look at, okay, based on their metadata, based on how often they change their creatives, and based on their category rankings, is it likely that they're doing keyword optimization? Is it likely that they're changing creatives very often? Are they at the top of their category, even though there's not really any signs they're doing this pure ASO style? And then that means they're probably running a lot of ads. Is there a very high brand popularity when you get the data from Apple search ads? And that tells you what are the strong points and weak points of your competitors, and that can help you understand the market as well.
No, I totally agree. And I mean, I tend to use the tools like Reflections or Game Refinery because they give me kind of a different sense of what's happening in the game.
Yeah.
But I think what you're describing about what's happening in terms of the marketing of the game, I think is also a very interesting kind of area. And I think, getting reliable information about those sort of things, I think is really important. And, obviously a lot of this stuff is aggregated. But that's okay as long as when you step in, you know what you're getting. Quick question here from Michael Adjiyama. Actually, no, it's from Tejas. I probably brutalized that name as well. What kind of spends are we talking about here for user acquisition? Are you looking at the duration for the competitor's launch case study?
I don't think I have the right to disclose the budget, unfortunately. We're talking about a major game in the US in a category that is already quite competitive. So I can tell you it was a very big budget.
Yeah,
Uh,
six
but
figure, six figure marketing
I,
ballpark. You're not
I
even going to tell me that.
think so, but I'm not exactly sure because I
No,
mean
no.
it's not in on a day, and I don't remember the exact figure when it comes to the monthly budget. But I remember mostly the challenge was to say, okay, we have prepared this budget, we're ready to go that high, but technically we don't want to be spending all of that. So how
Yeah, we've been doing some work with some investors in terms of trying to assess what return on advertising spend looks like recently, and in particular for they're doing UX loans. So the idea is that can you prove the return, therefore you can get the loan to scale it, and it's really fascinating trying to work out not just the effective spend because you can do that through attribution sources, but it's the knock-on effect in terms of the organic because you often see when you've got high level spend it has an effect not proportionate necessarily to the app store optimization spend that they've also done and trying to isolate the effect of spending money on ads, spending money on ASO, all this kind of stuff in terms of the user audience and then the quality of that audience is fascinating, and it's a real rabbit hole to try and get down to the bottom of.
Yes, I can definitely testify to that. And I think the challenge as well, and that's why I said one of the pitfalls is looking at the whole picture,
Yeah.
is that on the one hand, you want to know what kind of spend you should be giving to each sector.
Yes.
But at the same time, they're all connected. And so at the end, you also need to kind of take one step back and look at performance overall, because there's always going to be something that's changing somewhere and you didn't think about it. And it's also affecting the rest of what you're actively pursuing.
Exactly. And on that note, thank you very much. That was great. Unfortunately, we have to move on.